By the greetings extended, we saw that they were well acquainted, and our chief arose and joined them. At the door of the tent we saw him stop and stare for a moment. Then he walked quietly out the door with both hands extended, saying, "Well, well, this is indeed a surprise." A medley of voices arose as both men and women began to exchange greetings with him, and the three that had stepped through the door after him. At this, all seated at the table arose and crowded outside, where we found a group of 14 newcomers. The party included Emal's mother, our hostess from the village of our former winter quarters, the beautiful lady who had presided at the banquet that we attended in Emal's home, and Emal's son and daughter. In all there were a merry crowd, and it brought back remembrances of gatherings of former days. The surprise was complete, and we showed it, but the most complete surprise was shown by the friends who had joined us on this expedition. As we looked at them, we knew that their curiosity was getting beyond all bounds. They had not seen these appearances and disappearances as we had, and during the press of the expedition work we had been so engrossed that we had neglected to tell them of anything but fragmentary incidents. Coming as this had virtually from a clear sky, it left them absolutely nonplussed. Of course, we were heartily enjoying this at their expense. After introductions and greetings had been extended all around, the man who had charge of the camp and equipment sought Emal and our chief. With every evidence of abject helplessness, he said, "How am I going to feed all these people? Our supplies have not yet arrived, and we have barely enough provisions left for ourselves for this and the morning meal. Since we have made every arrangement to start on our return trip." While they were conversing, they had drawn together, and the leader of the combined expedition had overheard a part of the conversation. He stepped over and joined them. As he did so, I could hear him ask, "Where in the name of heaven did all these people come from?" Our chief looked at him with a smile and said, "You have just hit it, Ray. They did come direct from heaven. See, there are no conveyances." Ray answered, "But the thing that puzzles me most is they don't seem to have any wings. As they do not have wings, we should have heard the thud when they landed in the sand, especially as there are so many of them. But we did not even hear that. So we are going to decide for the time that your suggestion is right and perfectly logical." Emal then turned to the company and said he would be obliged, in order to allay the fears of the steward, to admonish the visitors for not bringing along their provisions. At this the steward seemed greatly embarrassed, and said he did not think of putting it quite so bluntly, but nevertheless the fact still remained that there certainly were not enough edibles to go around. Here the visitors joined in a merry laugh, which seemed to embarrass him still more. Then Emal's mother said there was no need for embarrassment or inconvenience. Our hostess and the beautiful lady joined in saying that they would gladly take charge and be responsible for the supper, as they fully expected to share the meal with us. This relieved the steward, and he quickly accepted the proffered service. The afternoon was now well advanced. It was one of those days on the Gobi when the weather fairly fawns upon the earth for one moment, then in the next instant may transform the scene into an inferno of relentless fury. Every available canvas was secured and spread upon the sand just outside the circle of the camp. To an outsider, the scene would have had the appearance of a merry picnic party, which indeed it was. When the canvas was all spread, the containers, which were used both for cooking and serving the camp meals, were brought out with their contents and placed on the canvas. Then the whole company gathered around. We could still see evidences of wonder and perplexity on the faces of those who had lately joined the party. Ray, the leader, looked at the containers and said that if he saw rightly the amount of food the containers held, and if that amount could be stretched sufficiently to feed that hungry mob, he was going to keep his eyes open for the performance of a miracle. One of our party said, "You better keep your eyes wide open, for that is just what you are going to see." Our chief said, "This is twice you have guessed right today, Ray." At this the three ladies began serving from the containers. As each place was served, it was passed on, and an empty plate was received for the full one, until all had been served most generously. As the serving progressed, we could see that Ray was getting more restless, and when his plate came to him, he passed it on, remarking that he could get along with a much less liberal helping. Our hostess assured him that he need not fear, as there would be plentiful supply for all. After all had been served bountifully, he again looked at the containers. When he saw that the contents had not been diminished, he arose and said, "At the risk of being impolite, ill-mannered, and a bounder, I am going to ask if I may sit by you 3 ladies, as I fully acknowledge my curiosity has so deliberately taken the upper hand that I cannot eat a bite." The ladies said they would look upon it as an act of courtesy if he wished to sit by them, whereupon he walked over and sat down on the edge of the canvas between Emil's mother and the beautiful lady. When he was seated, someone asked for bread. There was but 1 piece remaining on the box lid that served in place of a tray. The beautiful lady held out her hands, and almost instantly there was a large loaf of bread in them. This she passed our hostess, who began cutting it preparatory to serving. At this the leader arose and asked if they would kindly permit him to see the loaf as it was. The loaf was passed to him, and after examining it critically for a moment, he passed it back. We could see that he was very much agitated. He walked away a few steps, then returned, and, addressing himself directly to the lady, said, "I do not wish to seem impertinent, but this has muddled my thoughts to such an extent that I cannot refrain from asking questions." She bowed and said he was at liberty to ask any question he wished. He said, "Do you mean to tell me that you are able to set aside all the known natural laws, at least those that we know of, without the least exertion, and bring forth bread from an unseen or invisible supply?" The lady replied, "To us the supply is not unseen. It is always visible." Then it was perceived that as our hostess cut and served the loaf, it did not diminish. He became more calm, again took his place, and the lady continued, "If you could only see that the tragedy of Jesus' life ended with the crucifixion, that the joy of the Christ life began with the resurrection, and that the goal of every life should be the resurrection rather than the crucifixion. In this way all may follow him into the more abundant life of the Christ in them. Can you think of a more joyous and abundant life than to be one with this mighty power, this power of the Christ within? It is here you may know that you were created to have dominion over every form, thought, word, or condition. In living this life, which is the fulfillment of every need, you will find that you are living an exact scientific life." Jesus increased the few loaves and fishes the little lad had until he was able to supply ample for the multitude. You will observe that he bade them sit down in an orderly, expectant attitude, ready to receive the increased supply by fulfilling the law. If you are to find joy and satisfaction in the life of Jesus, you must fulfill the law of his life by acting in harmony with his ideas. You cannot stand and worry as to how you are to be fed. If Jesus had allowed this, the multitude never would have been satisfied. Instead, he quietly blessed and gave thanks for that which he had, and the supply was increased in sufficient measure to meet every need. Living did not become a difficult problem until man disobeyed and refused to listen to the inner voice. When he returns and again learns to listen to that inner voice, he will cease to labor for the means of a living, but he will work for the joy of creating. He will enter into the joy of creating, and he will create under the law of the Lord, or Word of God. Through his Word he will find that he can move upon the all-loving and all-enfolding substance of God and bring into visibility every ideal he holds in thought. It was in this way, step by step, that Jesus mounted to the heights and proved the supremacy of the Christ in him over the limited concept of mortal thought. When this is realized, work becomes a joyous quality of one's being. Jesus proved that the truly spiritual life is the only joyous life. He became clothed with dignity and glory because of his victory, yet that victory left him as free as a little child. Although the world is not wholly awake to its desire, it is this desire of joy and great blessing that it is seeking. Man may seek